everyone. Welcome to Switchblade Sisters Social Club, the true crime podcast where two friends exploit their worst fears for your entertainment.
You're welcome.
I'm Dee, a writer and podcaster.
And I'm Isla from Criminally Good Books, a true crime and crime fiction bookshop in York.
Follow us on all the socials.
Except for X, obviously.
Or have a look at our website, switchbladesisterssocialclub.com.
Check them out for all our latest episodes, events, deals, and other weird stuff.
Listeners' discretion advised. Hi.
Hello, you. Look at my lipstick. Doesn't it look good?
Yes, it does. I've gone for a little lip tint.
Delightful.
So I don't think we'll do much preamble today because it's a bit of a longer episode today. But I did want to just quickly mention that I just got on Google Alerts. We did an episode on Colin Pitchfork, me and my sister back in the olden days. And this is the guy, the first murderer to be caught using DNA. He murdered two young girls. He got released and then very quickly broke the terms of his release and got put back in prison, even though experts had said that he should never be released. And his parole hearing is up this week.
Ooh.
And just so people know, because this episode will come out in a couple of weeks, it's the 1st of October now. So by the time this episode comes out, hopefully we will have the news that he is not being granted parole. But yeah, that's just insanity. What a waste of resources. What a head fuck for the families of the victim and the friends, to have to go through a whole fucking thing again. Oh, it's just awful. I just can't. And again, like I said, we're totally on board with rehabilitation and people serving their time and being released and having, hopefully, reintegrating into society in a meaningful way. But this guy is not the one.
He was horrific, absolutely horrific.
And again, with these experts saying that he is not the type to leave jail and he's going to reoffend, basically, is what people think. So it's just horrendous.
Well, he's proven them right, Dee, because when he came out before, he did reoffend,
It was less than a month before he was back in jail.
Do you know how old he is now? Because I feel like he must be like 70s or 80s, or am I just making that up?
No, he must be 60s, 70s at least. But even if these parole hearings happen and he's not granted parole, the fact, like I said, that these victims' families who are themselves victims of him have to go through this time and time again.
Absolutely. I'm just looking him up at how old he is. Okay, so he's younger than I thought. He's 64.
That's young enough to be able to still commit harm, Anyways, So I'm going to get stuck into the case. I'll mention a couple of sources as I go along, but they'll all be in the show notes because there's a lot. It's a lot of newspapers online and so forth. So honestly, I went around the houses on this one. There was quite a lot to cover. There's a lot of sidebars to explain different terms and issues. But I chose this case specifically because of what's going on, what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, the last 2 years specifically, and the last 80 years. And so this case is set in Palestine. It's a specific case I'm going to cover, but I have to incorporate quite a lot of the context for it to fully be explained. The last couple of weeks, like I said, we're recording on the 1st of October, and no doubt a whole bunch of change will happen in the next couple of weeks before this episode comes out. So apologies that it won't be fully up to date. But we talk about this issue constantly, so we will be updating people each and every episode. But basically, last weekend, we talked about this in the last episode, Britain recognized Palestine as a state. It's bonkers because since the 90s, they've been pushing for a two-state solution while only recognizing one of the parties as a state. So much of this stuff just doesn't make sense. So I'm going to try to explain it, but don't try to find any logic in a lot of these fucking things, right? But the reason why recognizing the state of Palestine is important is because it affirms our inalienable rights to self-determination, to statehood, not as a favor and not as punishment to Israel, but because it is our legal entitlement. And remember, when I talk about international law and international humanitarian law, these are things that were set up after the world wars to make sure that those atrocities would never happen again. It corrects a historical responsibility. This is why it's super important for the UK in particular, because don't make a mistake of thinking just because it was called the British Mandate, that it wasn't a colony It just had a romanticized name. Yeah. I actually don't know why they called it a mandate rather than calling it a colony. I don't know. But it was basically the UK is a former colonial power that has a duty to the countries that they obliterated for their own benefit. This strengthens international law. Recognition reinforces the principle that borders and sovereignty must be settled through law and not through force or occupation. It counters the status quo. It challenges the annexation, the illegal settlement expansion, the denial of rights that are perpetuating this injustice. It supports peace negotiations because it puts people on an equal footing, making genuine negotiations more possible. It amplifies Palestinian voices. It aligns with UK public opinion, which is very, very supportive of the Palestinian cause. And remember, I'm trying to get out of the habit of saying pro-Palestinian because it implies that you're pro-Palestinian, therefore anti-Israeli. No, we are pro-equal rights for all, right? So being pro-Palestinian does not mean you're anti-Israel at all. And it lays the groundwork for concrete action. And this is the most important thing. We don't want recognition just to be like a statement. We want it to be followed up. Like it's symbolic, that's important. But recognition needs to be followed up with further steps, ending arms sales, enforcing international law, ensuring equal rights, supporting the players on the ground to coming to a long-lasting peace, right? That's what we want. It's also an interesting time because we are having I don't know if it's finished, but this weekend was the Labour conference, right? Where Labour sets its policies and its plans of action, its strategy for the coming year. Delegates approved a union-backed emergency motion declaring that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza and aligned with the UN Commission's findings, okay? So this isn't coming out of like the air or our assholes. The UN is...
finally, but Labour finally...
Welcome to the party. Better late than never. So the motion agreed at the Labour conference is that the UK government will use all means reasonably available to prevent genocide in Gaza, suspend arms trades and trade agreements with Israel, especially those supporting the conflict, ban trade with illegal settlements, and demand full unrestricted humanitarian access to Gaza, and a call for permanent ceasefire, withdrawal of Israeli forces, and an end to the illegal occupation and illegal settlement expansion. Now, that's what the MPs and the unions voted for.
Okay.
Let's see how much is taken on by Labour leadership. Keir Starmer will struggle to go against it, but it does happen that Labour leadership will go against what the party votes for or water it down or ignore it or delay it. So let's see. It's good, but again, needs to be followed up by action, right? It's also a momentous time because we have the Trump deal on the table at the moment.
Oh, I mean, what the hell?
Okay, so I'm going to lay out what exactly Trump with Netanyahu have proposed. They agreed themselves, no Palestinians present, and they've put this forward to Hamas. They've given Hamas 4 to 5 days to agree to this. So it's like, okay. They've said that they want an immediate ceasefire and a suspension of hostilities. Good. So far, so good. Hostage and prisoner exchange. Okay, I've talked about this. Why are the Israelis hostages and the Palestinians prisoners? Also, why does this matter? Hostage implies an innocent person that's being held against their will. Prisoner implies that they've done something wrong, and that's why they're being detained. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more, right? All Israeli hostages, alive and deceased, to be returned within 72 hours after the agreement. Israel to release 250 life sentence prisoners plus 1,700 Gazans detained since October 2023. This includes women and children, FYI. So let me just say what that means is we have 1,700 Palestinian hostages since October 7th, 2023. For each Israeli hostage whose remains are returned, Israel will release 15 deceased Gazan remains, which I read as one Israeli is worth at least 15 Gazans. Okay, this is the bit that starts getting really offensive to us, okay? And I always ask people, put yourself in the frame of mind if this was imposed on Britain and how you would feel as a British person, right? Gaza to be run by a temporary transitional Palestinian committee. And I'm like, excuse me, but who are you to say who runs us? But it will be overseen by an international body called the Board of Peace, right? Again, I'm sorry, can we not run ourselves? Chaired by Trump.
No.
with other
No.
world leaders, for example, Tony Blair.
So I saw this yesterday and I thought, what the hell are we doing now? It's so farcical.
So I'm going to go into why Tony Blair is so offensive to us.
I mean, I actually don't think that's the most offensive thing in what you've just said.
But it's just like, I'm sorry, you want us to be run by Trump and Tony Blair. We don't need to go into Trump, why we would hate that idea. But if you do need to go into that, there's an episode on Trump in our
But it's not even
season.
down to the individual date. It's not even just like Trump. It's like the US. They're saying it would be run by the US, right? And obviously that's Trump. So regardless of who was there, that's not acceptable.
I haven't gone into, there was also a bunch of stuff about economic rebuilding and free trade zones and so forth. So it's like basically manipulating our economy and our area, our geography, and our people to suit the states. So yeah, like I said, we've got 3 to 4 days to accept the proposal. Otherwise, there will be a sad end if we reject any part of it.
I don't think that they will accept it.
I don't know how they can, because I want to go into why Tony Blair is shit for us, okay?
Please do.
We know, obviously, he was in charge when we went into the Iraq War, the second 2003. He played a central role. The British public majority was against this war, so he went against the people that he is meant to be representing. Remember, there were claims of weapons of mass destructions. They were not found by anyone, the UN or anything. 250,000 civilians were killed by direct violence in Iraq, and obviously many, many more by indirect violence, the starvation, everything that comes with war. A lot of them were children. Some people estimate like over 1 million people. As a result, the whole region became destabilized. So whatever they were trying to pretend that they wanted to do, it destabilized the whole region. And then we saw the upsurge of things like ISIS and so forth. And we know where that sort of went on to. He was then appointed as special envoy of the Middle East Quartet. So the quartet was set up 2007, and it's pretty much dissolved now. And the idea was when he stepped down as UK Prime Minister, he would be running this. And the aim would be to help rebuild Palestinian institutions and prepare for statehood. Offensive. Just give us the opportunity to do that ourselves. But anyways, his offices and I think even his home were in the nicest hotel there, the American Colony, which I know you've been to. It's gorgeous. The whole exercise was viewed as a failure. He spent much of his time in the Gulf making lucrative business deals with Gulf states and companies based and linked to the region. So basically, we're not a fan of him in Palestine and the rest of the Middle East. So what does it say to name him in this role? It's like, we don't care what you think. We don't have your best interests at heart, or at the very least, we don't understand the nuances of the region and we shouldn't be involved. And I've put here, isn't Francesca Albanese free, special rapporteur to the UN? She's amazing. I'll happily submit sovereignty to her. She's amazing. But you know what I mean? It's not like we're getting a board of advisors that genuinely understand the region or care about the people on the ground. Because if you think Tony Blair gives a fuck about Israelis either, he does not.
I wonder, see, this whole thing smacks of an old boys network behind closed doors, almost something that they know is not going to be accepted.
Yeah.
They've gone to a certain stage where they've thought, some people think that Tony Blair would be acceptable in this role. So Trump and Netanyahu have gone so far to go, this isn't so bad. Some people might think this is okay, but we know it's going to be rejected. And then we're going to look like the ones that have put forward this amazing plan. It's going to be rejected. And it's going to be the Palestinians that are going to suffer because Hamas aren't going to accept it. But it's like you said, how can they accept it?
So this is the tale as old as time with regards to Israel-Palestine. We're accused of rejecting a lot of peace proposals, but they are actually so offensive and so unworkable to us that we can't accept them. And again, I want our listeners to always think, how would you feel if this was being proposed to you, if this was happening to you?
I think before I started working at St. John, I was ignorant to the whole Israel-Palestine conflict. I was aware of it, but certainly not until I obviously started working there. And I think that I would say to any listeners that don't really understand, whenever they see a headline just try and do a little bit of research, because when you see a headline that says Hamas rejects deal, which I suspect will come up quite soon,
Yes.
it will be to grab for sales. If it said Hamas
Reject
rejects
unacceptable proposal.
unacceptable proposal that would deny their statehood, that would mean like X, Y, and Z, and would mean that Trump gets to put a Trump Golden Tower in the middle of Gaza and turn it into that beautiful resort that it once was. If Trump gets his hands on it, they're going to spend billions on it. It'll be a Playboy place. It'll be amazing. And I think this is probably sounds really awful, but I think that they will have Palestinians working in
Oh,
hotels
100%.
while it's going to be like a Dubai where you've got all of the workers outside of the city and
Living
only
in,
people.
yeah, living in
It's
like,
just going to
yeah.
be something like that, but even worse.
So this proposal, it's a win-win for them because if Hamas accept, great, they get everything that they want, the US and Israel. If they reject it, which they know they probably will, then they have the excuse to completely obliterate Gaza further. That's the long and the short of it. So I wanted to give a little bit of the context because I get people asking all the time. I know our listeners are interested in this issue. Many people are confused. It's such a long history, and some of it is so complicated, but some of it is so simple. So I wanted to give a bit of the context and explain a little bit where we are now, but a bit of the context of where we were when this case happens. Because, like I said, I'm talking about a specific case.
I'm very
Okay.
interested in this.
So I thought it would basically explain a little bit how we got to here and what's happening now as well. The case I'm covering is Rachel Corrie. So this is the legacy of a true martyr and the struggle for Gaza. Now, I know that you know this case, but maybe the name hasn't immediately popped up for you, but I can tell you that every Palestinian knows this name. Sorry, I told you in advance. Get your tissues ready, because as I was researching this, I was bawling. So I've said the fucking name of the case. I'm starting to cry.
If you get your tissues, Steve.
I do. It's all snotty because I've been using it all morning. But I want to give you a little bit more of the context, right? Because we constantly hear about Palestinians being terrorists. Much of the struggle, though, is actually against an illegal occupation that has been mainly, most of our resistance has been popular nonviolent resistance. Obviously, that doesn't hit the media like violence, right? I wanted to touch on first why this occupation is illegal. It's not my opinion, you know. It will be very clear when I'm giving you my opinion because I'll probably be swearing. But I want you to know these are all facts here, and this is why I'm listing the sources and everything. So if you repeat anything you hear on this and someone questions you, you can back it up with a whole bunch of stuff and people and organizations that are much more knowledgeable and important than me, you know. But again, I just want people to always remember that even when Palestinians resort to violence, which I don't like, they are resisting an illegal occupation. And so is it justified? I don't know. I don't know. But at the end of the day, what do you expect? What would you do when you are faced with violence? We know that the US and the UK definitely retaliate much more violently to much smaller threats to their civil liberties. So here is why the occupation is illegal, right? It's a violation of the UN Charter 1945, which prohibits the acquisition of territory by force. This is done several times over, but in particular 1967, when Gaza became occupied formally. It's a violation of a bunch of UN Security Council resolutions. Multiple of them affirm that the occupation should end, that the occupation has no legal validity. It's a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, 1949, which prohibits transfer of an occupier's civilian population into occupied territory. As a reminder, the settlements, therefore, are illegal, and Israel's settlements breach this entirely. There's over 700,000 settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, by the way, is in the West Bank. We don't like, as Palestinians, it being thought of as separately, but in this case, I'm mentioning it separately because quite often the settlements, the illegal settlements in Jerusalem, are called neighborhoods. And that is a very euphemistic term for illegal settlements. So the International Court of Justice, advisory opinion 2004, declared the construction of the separation wall in the West Bank illegal. Now, I want to remind people that that separation wall supposedly was going to be on the Green Line that was dividing the West Bank from Israel itself. It's twice as long as that border because it snakes in and steals land from the West Bank. So illegal, illegal, illegal. Apartheid and prolonged occupation. Human rights groups, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, argue that the occupation has evolved into a system of apartheid, violating international conventions on the suppression and punishment of the crime of apartheid, 1973. All of these conventions were put in place to stop horrible things that had already happened from happening again. The occupation has lasted nearly 6 decades, far beyond what the international law permits as temporary military control. I don't think 60, 70, 80 years, depending on where you started and what area specifically you're talking about, can count as temporary for anyone. It's a denial of self-determination, which is, like I said, recognized by international law as a right for people. The occupation obstructs the construction of a sovereign Palestinian state, which again is a violation of international law. And the use of collective punishment and the use of force against civilians, such as home demolitions, blockades of Gaza, and disproportionate military assaults. We've seen weaponized starvation and weaponized humanitarian aid. All of these breached the rules of war and international law. This is what, when you hear about violence against Israel or attacks on Israel, this is what they're rebelling against. Again, I hate all of the violence, but just this is the context that we're operating in. What can you expect? And can you condemn Hamas without condemning Israel? I don't think you can. For earlier history, we have a film, the Britain-Palestine Project, which is, one of the charities I work with a lot. They have a film on their YouTube called Britain in Palestine, which explains how Britain got involved, how the mandate was set up, and how they left. It was a lot of work, so they just upped and left after providing arms and military training to both sides, promising both sides the whole land. They just fucked off. But for this case, I'm going to start with the first intifada. A lot of people might have heard this term intifada. In Arabic, it means uprising. And we had our first one in 1987. It was 1987 to about 1993 was our first intifada. It was actually like a beautiful moment in our resistance, if that's possible to say. I'm romanticizing it. It was fucking awful. But everything since has been just even worse. But this was a time of a lot of nonviolent resistance. It was mass protests, general strikes, boycotts, tax refusal, mass civil nonviolent disobedience by Palestinians in Israel, in the West Bank, in Gaza. Of course, there was some violence. The most common act on the side of the Palestinians was children throwing stones. This was a very common trope and stereotype, but it happened. They were throwing stones at armed soldiers and tanks. But don't worry, justice was served. Many of these children were shot. Many were left wounded or killed. So I don't have that many close friends from Gaza because of the West Bank and Gaza being so separate. We don't have the opportunity to mix and mingle like we used to. And me being of a certain age, Gaza's been shut off for much of my adult life. But one of my really close Gaza friends had a friend who was shot in this way when they were together. They were throwing stones. They were about 11. His friend was killed. He had another friend in another instance who was shot and paralyzed, similar age. So Israel's response is always brutal and very, very often disproportionate by far. Soldiers were ordered at this time during the peaceful protests of the First Intifada to break the bones of protesters. That's in quotes. That came from the then defense minister, Yitzhak Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin was the one that Yasser Arafat later on the lawn of the White House signed the peace process in the 90s with. So I can't imagine the difficulty of having to sit down at a table and, on both sides having to negotiate peace with your mortal enemy, right? So Yitzhak Rabin, after the 90s peace deal, was actually assassinated by an Orthodox Jewish settler, an illegal settler, who thought he was being too lenient on the Palestinians. So after decades of being thought of as pariahs, we Palestinians started getting some international sympathy during this intifada because we were doing peaceful protests and facing one of the biggest military forces in the world. And so the world started pushing for peace a little bit. And this is what led to eventually this peace process, also known as the Oslo Accords. So, what are the Oslo Accords? So, the Oslo Accords, 1993 to 1995-ish, was our sort of peace deal. Again, some of us will remember Yitzhak Rabin, Yasser Arafat, Bill Clinton, all cuddly on the lawn.
Yeah. I remember.
It called for mutual recognition. Israel recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people. That's the Palestine Liberation Organization. Up until that point, that was kind of our government in exile, with Yasser Arafat as the head of that. The PLO recognized Israel's right to exist and renounced armed struggle. FYI, we've done this many times over. Hamas has done this.
But it doesn't make newspaper headlines.
No, it's boring.
Does it?
But I just wanted to say this because we often hear about how Hamas wants to destroy Israel, send it into the sea or whatever. That's bullshit. Hamas has officially recognized Israel and Israel's right to exist many times over. It led to the creation of the Palestinian Authority to administer limited self-rule in parts of the West Bank and Gaza for 5 years, pending final status talks. They had a bunch of issues that they still needed to resolve, which I'll go on to. Israel agreed to withdraw from parts of the West Bank and Gaza in stages. And some of you will have heard the terms Area A, Area B, Area C. Area A was under full Palestinian civil and security control. This was like the center of some of the major cities, not Jerusalem, though, which is our capital as well. Area B, Palestinian civil control, but Israeli security control. So kind of pretend Palestinian control. Area C was still to be under full Israeli control. And this is about 60% of the West Bank. So the majority. Why did the Oslo Accords fail? Because clearly this is a peace process signed in the 90s and we do not have peace yet. The settlements expanded. They did not freeze. The number of settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem more than tripled since 1993. It fragmented the Palestinian territory. So by carving them up into these different areas, it basically made separate Palestinian areas that are not connected. It basically led to disconnected areas with checkpoints, the separation wall, and so forth. It kind of made it easier for Israel to divide and conquer. There was very little sort of control or autonomy for the Palestinian people. And these final status issues were not agreed on, and we never came to an agreement. And these final status issues were what happens with Jerusalem. Jerusalem at the moment, West Jerusalem is Israeli, East Jerusalem supposedly Palestinian. Both of us want Jerusalem as our capital, as a shared capital or split capital, whatever. But we never came to an agreement about how this would be done. Refugees, half of the Palestinian population, like me, live outside of Palestine. What about our right to return? Let's not forget the internal refugees. Most of Gaza is actually refugees from Palestine, from the rest of Palestine. Can we return? Where can we return to? Under what context? Many of us won't. If I could move to Jerusalem tomorrow, I probably wouldn't. My life is here. My family are here. But it should be my choice. I shouldn't have to go to my home country on a tourist visa,
And also face persecution at the airport just trying to get in.
Yeah, which I'll get onto, my friend.
Good.
I just want to say that after the Oslo Accords, Israel said that they would introduce family reunification. So some Palestinians who still had family back home would be able to apply for family reunification. And my dad did. And he was told, because his mom was still alive, my grandmother, and he was told that he wasn't closely related enough to his mother to qualify. So sometimes these initiatives are announced, and when you read further, you're like, oh, it was bullshit, wasn't it? Final borders were not ever decided, and a whole bunch of other issues. So that kind of stalled the peace process as well. And basically, it ultimately led to a deepening of the occupation. It allowed Israel to consolidate military and settlement control while offloading civilian responsibilities onto the PA. Oh, so now we don't have to do your education and your healthcare in certain areas, but we're also not going to give you the ability to do that yourself. So then in 2000, we had the second Intifada. Now, please bear in mind that this is after a couple more decades of brutal illegal occupation and military control and a failing peace process. So it's an even more difficult situation. And again, please also judge as you would judge any other people or nation. What would the UK or the US do in these situations? Because we know that they respond to the smallest threat in much more violent ways. Imagine if you had someone else taking everyone's human rights and lives away for decades in your home country, what would you do? So what I'm coming to is that this second intifada was more violent on the Palestinian side. Yes, it was terrifying for everyone involved, and I hate that anyone had to live under this fear. There were suicide bombings on buses and at checkpoints and so forth. There were armed attacks by Palestinians. And as you can imagine, there was an overwhelming response by the Israeli army. My dad always said that Israel got very good at provoking us into provoking them so that they could fucking annihilate us. And I've paraphrased that because obviously my dad didn't say fucking, but
no, I can't imagine your dad saying like any swear word.
Occasionally he says bastard, and I'm like, yeah. The Gaza Strip, which had been illegally occupied since 1967 and was separate geographically from the West Bank, suffered really badly. There were incursions, housing demolitions, restrictions on what could be brought in, for example, food and reconstruction materials. I'll go into that more later. Unlike today, though, Gaza back then was somewhat accessible to outsiders, volunteers, journalists, activists, diplomats, etc. Around about this time is when I was involved in organizing a delegation of MPs to go over, so these people bore witness, reported back to the rest of the world what was going on. In fact, during the Second Intifada, dozens of foreign activists would come over with an organization called the International Solidarity Movement. I feel like crying again because these people are amazing. They would go find themselves on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, acting as unarmed human shields in an effort to protect Palestinian civilians and to bear witness and report back. These international volunteers, many of them in their 20s, lived among Palestinian communities. They wore high-vis jackets everywhere they went, making it obvious that they were internationals, Shouldn't matter. No one should be shot for no reason. But the idea was that they would stop things from happening because of their presence.
And there'd be more repercussions, presumably, if anything happened to them.
You would hope. So they placed their bodies in front of Israeli bulldozers and tanks when there were housing demolitions happening and so forth. They believed their foreign citizenship and their presence might deter attacks on civilians and their properties, their homes. They were there to bear witness, report back to the rest of the world, because, of course, no one believes us when we say things as Palestinians. They need foreigners to repeat it for it to be believed. It's just a sad state of affairs. And like I said, they were in their 20s. So perhaps a little bit more naive and idealistic than you get when you're older, when you're jaded.
And also, like, maybe, I know this sounds really awful, but for a lot of them, like, less to lose if they're not married, if they don't have families, if they don't,
It's before you have your career in place and your dependents and all of these things. You're a lot more fearless and brave. All of these reasons why it obviously attracted a younger demographic. There were older International Solidarity Movement volunteers, obviously, but it was a lot of just brave young people who wanted to change the world. They didn't want the world that they were going to live in to be like this, And Israel, as you can imagine, hated them. So they were constantly trying to evict them for their own safety, which in itself is ironic because it's like, safety from what? From you guys,
From your bulldozers.
Yeah. So it was in this really charged context that we have this amazing young American woman named Rachel Corrie arriving in Gaza, and she was determined to make a difference. I want to talk about Rachel pre-Gaza, right? I want to show you a picture. You can just tell she's fucking awesome, can't you?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's Rachel. She grew up in Olympia in Washington, Rachel Corrie. She was in college. She became passionate peace activist. She was organizing events to raise awareness about Palestine. This was in a time where it wasn't cool to be pro-Palestinian. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She was only a couple of years older than me, which obviously makes it resonate even more.
Yeah.
And when I found out about her, the more I read about her, learned about her at the time, I just thought, fuck, like this girl, if I met her at uni, I would definitely try to be her friend, because she was just so amazing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this isn't me romanticizing her because, she's passed and she's done this amazing thing. Like, just everything you read about her is just like, wow. And again, so young. For her senior year, independent study in early 2003, the 23-year-old Rachel decided to travel to Gaza and join the International Solidarity Movement, the ISM, I'm going to call them from now, hoping to connect her hometown, Olympia, with Rafah, which is in Gaza on the border of Gaza and Egypt, as sister cities or twin cities, I guess we would call it here in the UK. She arrived in Gaza in January 2003. She received her training in nonviolent resistance because they train you up when you join this movement, and soon was horrified by the devastation that she encountered. And I should say at this point that she was a prolific email and diary writer. And this is what I mean. When you read what she writes, you're just like, wow, you know? So we have a lot of things in her own words, which is haunting and beautiful. Alan Rickman and journalist Catherine Viner, actually, yes, the Alan Rickman, edited her diaries into a play called My Name is Rachel Corrie. I have the book here. If you want to cry yourself to sleep, I'm showing you because definitely
I know,
a true
I'm going to
crime.
write it down. I'm writing it down. I know this is really silly, but I'm writing it down. Okay. Yeah.
So, and it's compiled of her emails, her diaries, and so forth. Here's one of the things she said soon after her arrival. This was, I think, in an email to her parents. Homes were destroyed and people detained and killed on a daily basis. She described how the Israeli army had dug up roads and sealed checkpoints. In quotes, Palestinians who want to go register for university can't. People can't get to their jobs, and internationals won't make it here. In another note to her parents, she confessed how, in quotations, the sheer kindness of people here, coupled with the overwhelming evidence of the willful destruction of their lives, makes it seem unreal to me. Now, I wanted to ask you, because you're obviously an international who spent a lot of time in the West Bank with Palestinians. Is that the impression that you got? Like, it's always a shock, isn't it, when you go over there, even when you're following the issue closely because you're working on it, you're living it, whatever. Every time you go over there, and I'm saying this as a Palestinian, there's always something that shocks me, even though I've been following it day in, day out. And I'm also always just so surprised by how welcoming, hospitable the people that are living there are, because I don't think I'd be like that.
Yeah. I mean, we obviously worked for a British charity when we were over, like when you and I met and we went over. But I would say that I went over, and on the positive side, I would say that every single person, every Palestinian person that I met was amazing, open, inviting you to their house, bringing in food to work, chatty, just want you to know about them, know about like places to go, like local places to go, recommending restaurants where you could properly have some proper Palestinian food, and just really absolutely amazing human beings. But then, sitting, listening to people talking about their journey to work, for example, trying to get to the hospital that we worked at, they have to go through various checkpoints, and they just never complained. They just got on with it. And I just think if that was us, I suppose a lot of people were born into it, though. A lot of people are born into it and don't know anything else. But then I would be so bitter. I would be so bitter.
And also, with the younger people were born into it, they don't know anything different. But just like social media lets us have more insight into what their lives are like, social media also means they have more insight into what our lives are like. So imagine living like that and seeing what other people get to enjoy. That must be a bitter pill to swallow as well. So they're seeing,
Yeah.
even though they don't know any different, they're seeing more of what day-to-day life is like for other people around the world. And knowing that they don't have it, I don't know. I just can't imagine. Like, I'm changed every time I go home.
I've been into Gaza, but, different things that you have to do in terms of you have to get something from the Palestinian Authority, and then you have to get something from the Israeli Authority, then you have to do this. And then some of the nurses wouldn't be able to get to the hospital because they had to go through various checkpoints, or they had to apply for visas to get out of Gaza. And we're doing, I can't remember, it was at the St. John's ceremonies, like at St. John and stuff. And we never ever knew if anyone was going to be able to come out of Gaza to pick up their awards and stuff.
And again, we were a British organization with the Queen at the time as our head.
As the sovereign head.
The sovereign head of our organization. So there was a little bit of a buffer, and we had enjoyed as an organization a little bit more privilege than some of the others, but not much.
I think probably I think maybe a lot more, I
Oh,
think
definitely compared to
probably,
Palestinian organizations, but even compared
yeah.
to other international ones. Sorry, I'm so snotty. It's just emotional. This is another quote from Rachel. No amount of reading, attendance at conferences, documentary viewing, and word of mouth could have prepared me for the reality of the situation here. You just
Right.
can't imagine it unless you see it, which is 100% true, I think. This is why, a lot of the organizations I've worked for, including St. John, we've brought delegations over there because you can't understand the context that people are living in and the horrendous conditions. And also, on a positive note, you can't fully imagine how amazing these organizations are until you see it. Like the work that St. John do in the region's fucking beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So Rachel Corrie was based in Rafah. I'm just going to bring up a map of Gaza so that people can see where she was. So there's a little bit of confusion sometimes because Gaza is used interchangeably to refer to the entire Gaza Strip and Gaza City, because the capital of Gaza is called Gaza City. I'm mainly referring to Gaza Strip when I say Gaza, and that's what most people mean. And then we specify by saying Gaza City when we're talking specifically about the city. As you can see, Rafah is down in the sort of southwest on the border-ish with Egypt. It faced a lot of difficulty because Israel claimed that there were lots of militants and so forth based around there, that there were tunnels going into Egypt and stuff to get whatever they thought that we were smuggling in. So it faced a lot of housing demolitions, a lot of incursions, a lot of this, that, and the other. So it was a hot spot, let's say, in the conflict. And so you had a lot of international solidarity movement volunteers there. Rachel dedicated herself to protecting the homes of Palestinian families that were sort of marked for demolition by the Israeli army. So they would often go and live in these homes.
Sorry, Dee, to interrupt. Is it worth telling people why they were marked for demolition? Because I don't think that
Yeah.
we've covered that unless you're going to.
So, no, you're right. I didn't touch on it, but either they were trying to make, in Rafah in particular, they're trying to make buffer zones. So they wanted like huge buffer zones between the borders between Israel and Gaza and Egypt and Gaza so that they could patrol and make sure nothing dodgy was going on. So it was mainly for that. Also, if they suspected that stuff was going on in the home, it was the opening of a tunnel or fuck knows whatever they thought.
But also for settlements, though, as well, right?
Well,
Eventually.
Gaza was slightly different, and I'll touch on that. In the West Bank, yes,
Mm-hmm,
a lot of
mm-hmm.
the homes,
Yeah.
like my family home, marked for demolition because in the future they want to expand the settlements into that area. I mean, the idea is to remove all Palestinian homes eventually and replace them with Israeli homes. So, but in Gaza it was different. It was normally for military reasons, like I said, to create these large buffer zones. By March 2003, so Rachel had only got there in January, Israeli armored Caterpillar bulldozers, accompanied by tanks, were methodically razing buildings to the ground in this area along the Gaza-Egypt border. Again, like I said, mainly to create this buffer zone. Rachel and a handful of other ISM activists from the US, Britain, loads of countries, ISM was a global movement, stationed themselves in front of bulldozers day after day, shouting through bullhorns, like megaphones, and waving their arms, trying to force the crews to stop the demolition of the houses. They always wore fluorescent high vis so that it was very clear that they are civilian, international, they're part of this movement. Initially, they couldn't believe that you had all these foreigners coming and risking their lives alongside them. And so they were initially like confused, I'm going to say at the very least, but they welcomed these people into their homes. They were like shocked and amazed when these people would put themselves in front of the tanks and bulldozers. They would even camp in tents between Israeli sniper towers and civilian homes to stop them shooting at civilians. I've met a lot of ISM former volunteers in my time, and many of them have come home and they continue working on our cause, either in a professional capacity or as volunteers. And I cannot tell you how much it means to us Palestinians here and there that there are people like that in the world. They're the ones that don't want to live in this shit, right? That want the world to be better. And they actually do something about it.
And they're risking their lives.
Risking their lives. So on the afternoon of the 16th of March, 2003, Israeli bulldozers moved towards a home of the Nasrallah family in Rafah, where Rachel and others had been staying. Alone and unarmed, Rachel climbed on top of a pile of dirt in the bulldozer's path and begged the driver to stop. The massive machine just carried on moving towards her. The family, the children included, watched in horror. I'm sure that people on the sidelines were shouting at the driver to stop, shouting at Rachel to move. But the driver didn't stop and Rachel didn't move. And she was knocked down by the bulldozer's blade. And then the driver continued to drive over her body, crushing it under the weight of the machine. Rachel had to be dug out of the sand, but her injuries were fatal. Her whole body was broken. Her skull was fractured. She died in a local hospital within an hour. She was, like I said, 23 years old. I'm going to show you a picture of her taken earlier that day. So I'm not saying this is the bulldozer that ran her over, but this was on the same day earlier.
She's got a high-vis vest on. It's bright
It's
orange.
not even a vest. It's a full-on jacket,
it's a full
isn't it?
jacket.
Long sleeve
got
and
a
everything.
megaphone. Yeah, and she's got the bands around her, like below her waist.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the visibility ones. If any lights go on them, it kind of, yeah, you can definitely see that she's peacefully protesting.
And she was on a mound of dirt, so she was higher in the eye line of the driver, because obviously it is a high vehicle, you know what I mean?
Mm.
She's also fucking blonde and white in a sea of Palestinians.
See, this is the other thing that we didn't say when we showed the picture. When you showed the picture before, long blonde hair, scarf around her neck, white, very clearly not your typical Palestinian. And even if she was, so
It
like,
shouldn't
it doesn't matter, but it shouldn't matter. But she's very much likely to be a foreigner, and she's unarmed.
Very fucking obvious, to say the least, right?
Yeah.
So this death sent shockwaves around the world. But to be honest, I'm going to say it, not as many as you would expect. Like, not as much follow-up action, right? Considering she was the first American civilian to die in direct action in Gaza. Add to that the fact that, like we said, pretty young blondes do get more media attention. That's not me being bitter because I'm old and brunette, but we know this statistically. If you go missing, if you get murdered, if you are a pretty blonde thing, you will get more attention, right? And she was definitely fucking stunning. Not that this matters, but I'm saying it because it did get some media attention. It did get a lot of condemnation, but that's about it. So what happened that afternoon? Fellow ISM activists insist that the bulldozer driver saw her clearly. Like we said, she was wearing a bright neon long jacket and she was shouting through a megaphone. She was blonde, so again, more highlighted and visible. And we've just seen the pictures. It was broad daylight. She was clearly unarmed. She was very noticeable. The Israeli military, however, claimed that it was an accident and that the driver's line of sight was limited. It's like, well, hang on, why are you using these vehicles? And that he didn't see her. Again, she was on a mound, so she would have been higher up.
And people were shouting at the driver.
Yeah. So
and he would know, all the drivers would know, Dee, you're going to knock down a house today. You know there's going to be activists there.
And he not only hit her, but then fully ran over her body. So I'm sorry. An internal Israeli Defense Force, that's the Israeli Army, investigation quickly cleared the crew of any wrongdoing, calling her death a regrettable mistake. And you know how I feel about internal investigations. We investigated ourselves and we decided we did nothing wrong. Sorry, but not sorry is basically what happened. So it was
an accident, then it was a mistake.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, I mean, that's just rubbish.
So no one was criminally charged. No one faced any repercussions.
I actually didn't know that because I've heard there's been quite a few of these, and actually there has been repercussions in like for some of like the Israeli soldiers or like people. So I'm very shocked about that. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. This finding was obviously condemned by human rights groups, even some governments, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, others, etc., obviously got involved and said their piece. They said it was a whitewash and part of a pattern of impunity for Israeli forces. But as you know, amazing organizations can be saying stuff for years and decades before it becomes mainstream thought and language. They have all been calling it apartheid for years now, what's happening in Palestine. B'Tselem, like I said, is an Israeli human rights organization. You have loads of Israelis that are saying the same thing. Break the silence, which is the Israeli army is a conscription army. Everyone is obliged, with some exceptions, to do military service. So break the silence is a lot of people that have come out of that army and been like, what the fuck did I just have to do? A lot of people that don't necessarily align very politically with us, but they can at the very least agree that what's going on now is not good for Israel and Israeli civilians as well as Palestinians. And there's no way that you're going to have peace in Israel while you're doing this illegal occupation and oppressing a whole other people. So it's not just Palestinians or people, lefty white people, you know. Even the US ambassador to Israel at the time, Dan Shapiro, bluntly told the Israelis that their investigation was not thorough, I'm doing quotation marks, thorough, credible, and transparent, and that the American government was not satisfied with its closure. But I'm surprised because America did not push for an external investigation or even for one to be carried out by themselves. So nothing happened. One thing I will say is, when will people realize that Israel does not care about condemnation? Words literally do not hurt them. They do not give a shit about countries, organizations, individuals saying that they don't agree with something Israel's done. Unless it translates into meaningful action or something that will encourage them financially, politically, whatever, to actually change their behavior, they won't. They literally find it funny at this point, I think, when people say naughty, naughty Israel, you know? Rachel's grieving parents, these people, Cindy and Craig Corrie, spent years seeking accountability. They filed a civil lawsuit in Israel, hoping for at least some semblance of justice. But in 2012, so this is almost 10 years after she died, an Israeli court rejected the lawsuit, upholding the military's version that the driver simply hadn't seen her. To which I ask, I didn't know that you could be a soldier and a bulldozer driver if you're blind. Because that's the only thing the only explanation I can understand is that this guy must have been legally blind driving a bulldozer.
Do we know who the guy was, just out of interest? Has he ever said anything?
No, I don't. I'm sure it would have been shut down. He wouldn't have been allowed to speak publicly. I actually can't even remember if he was named, whether it was like protected, you know, to protect his identity. The judge ruled that Israel bore no liability since the incident occurred during a combat operation, effectively shielding the Israeli army from any kind of claims in the future. So basically, she's just a casualty of war, and all's fair in love and war, except it's not. And that's why we have rules of war and war crimes. So we're going to move on to the aftermath and the enduring legacy of Rachel Corrie. But can we just take a moment to show your top?
Yeah, I didn't know what you were going to be discussing today, but this is my top. Can you explain what we've got here, Dee?
So this is a top which has a heart made out of our keffiyeh scarf, you know, the Palestinian scarf, and little doves flying off of it. Keffiyeh scarf is the black and white scarf, sometimes red and white, with, you know, the white scarf with the black embroidery. And that embroidery represents olive trees and fishing nets, which is like obviously our industries and so forth. And they're quite often used to protect from the sun and the sand on the ground and so forth. But they're it's just one of our national treasures is our keffiyeh scarf, which obviously a lot of people are wearing now in solidarity. So really, really lovely top. I love it.
I know. I did not know that this is what we're doing today. But to be honest, I do wear a lot of Palestinian stuff anyway.
Because you're basically one of us.
It's like basically like every couple of days they've got something on. But yeah, very fitting for today.
In Gaza, Rachel Corrie became a symbol of international solidarity and sacrifice, not just in Gaza, the rest of Palestine and the rest of the world. Like I said earlier, I don't think there's a single Palestinian who doesn't know her name. I'm sure this is even true of younger generations who have been born since this incident happened. News of the young American's death spread quickly through the occupied territories. There were vigils, there were memorials, wreaths and posters bearing her face appeared everywhere across Palestine. By the next year, Palestinians began naming their newborn daughters Rachel in her honor, which, FYI, it's a very Jewish name, Rachel. So it's quite significant that they would go ahead and name their kids something that could be mistaken as a Jewish name.
There'll be lots of 20-year-olds now called Rachel.
We had like sports tournaments, buildings, prizes, all sorts of things named after her. Because to the people under siege in Gaza, Rachel's ultimate act, giving her life to protect a Palestinian home, just resonated so deeply. So I've got a quote from one of the Nasrallah daughters. So one of the daughters of the home she was defending. She later said, "We are hoping for 1 million Rachel Corries to be our fearless lifeline. We really need that kind of support right now." Her martyrdom stands as a reminder that outsiders with privilege choose to stand with them in their darkest hours. So I'm including you in this category. Sorry, that's why I'm going, because Isla, you've always been so supportive. And you've been one that has gone over there and seen it for your own eyes. And I think it changed you as well and changed your trajectory in terms of how you feel about this issue. But I always remember the time that we went over there together. And as a Palestinian, even like me traveling on a British or Belgian passport, we always get taken into what we affectionately call the brown room,
The
because it's
brown room.
all Palestinians. So it was always really awkward when I'd go over with delegations. And to be honest, when I'd go over with delegations, I'd highlight the awkwardness. Do you see how I'm being treated differently to you who are not Palestinian descent, right? But I would always get separated for, hours of waiting around and hours of interrogation. And when I say hours, I mean like 8 hours plus, etc. No food, no water, nothing. I think they recently put in a vending machine, but it's like, great, thanks.
I have to buy stuff from you.
Yeah,
Thanks
when I
very much.
could just be at home. These interrogations, they're terrifying in there, like they don't introduce themselves. They don't tell you whether they're army, customs, immigration, what. They don't treat you nicely. It's I've said it before, you could be arrested for murder in this country and you'd be treated more respectfully than you are just trying to go and visit your family back home. I would always, like, when I travel out there with non-Palestinians, book 2 cars to come to the airport to pick us up, one for whoever I'm traveling with and one for me later, because I wouldn't want them hanging around and waiting, like I said, potentially
But
hours.
that's you though. You're so lovely. You don't want anyone having to wait around for you. Why should
I
people
know.
have to wait for you to go into your country?
I know, it's ridiculous, but Isla, when you and I traveled out there together, you refused to leave me alone in the brown room and you came with me and therefore faced your own fun interrogations. And it just means a lot to me, because these
I love
acts,
you.
I know,
I
but
would
it's just,
never have left you.
I know, I know that. So
But we did have fun, if we can call it fun, in the
I think
brown
we
room.
watched Bake Off and stuff because I
Well,
was
I made
prepared.
you go in front of me because you said to me, like, I'm going to be carted off. And I didn't want to go first and obviously not see what happened to you. And I was your boss at the time, but you're now the boss of me. But I remember you going first and then you being taken off. And I'm just kind of watching you and you're like, bye. And I was like, could you just tell me where my colleague's gone? Like, why is she going over there? And I can't remember. He didn't say the brown room, obviously. He
Yeah.
said something. And he said that I could go through. And I was like, oh, don't just stay with her. And then they just told me to go over to the room. And I went in and you were there. And we just watched Bake Off for a bit. And then we were both separated while we both had a little chat, didn't we? I think I
Yeah.
had 2 chats and you had 3 chats.
Yeah. And they always say they're trying to establish if you have a connection with the land, which is a bizarre thing when you think about it. Like,
A connection with the land. I'm
it's like, first of all,
Palestinian.
I'm here because I have a connection with the land. Secondly, is that a criteria for whether you're allowed to come and visit on a tourist visa or
Well,
not? Do
they
you know what I
asked me
mean?
if I was they asked me why I was there and they asked me if I was a terrorist. And I said, no, I'm not a
Yeah.
terrorist. No.
I went to Slovenia recently. No one asked me, oh, we just need to establish if you have a connection with the land. No, I had the legal right to travel to that country. That's all that matters.
I know, it's just insane.
Bizarre.
It's
It's
just
bizarre.
stupid. And I think though that just to say on the one of the trusts that we went with was make sure that she kind of waited at the other end. When we were going back to the UK, quite a few of the trustees went off. But she kind of stood around to make sure that we weren't, kept until 1 minute before our flight and then put in the plane.
I just want to say on that note, those of you that have white privilege, I half have it because I kind of present white. I am half Flemish. But those of us that don't have all of those privileges, it's not that we don't want you to enjoy those privileges. We just want them also. And also we want you to acknowledge that you have those privileges and be grateful for them, because some of us don't,
To be aware that actually some people don't have that privilege.
Right.
And just to be aware like what that is. It doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy your privilege, but just know that actually not everyone's the same.
Yeah.
Like,
because I remember one of the people that I went out with, it was like, oh, what did you do? It's like, nothing. I did nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
Do you know what I mean?
I was accused of being a prostitute going through the airport at one point because I was going through with an older trustee. You know, you would not get that in a British airport or a French airport or I don't think you would get it anywhere else apart from an Israeli airport.
The first question is, where does this name originate from? That in itself is like, why implies you're going to use it for what we would call racist purposes, racial profiling or something. And these chats, they involve asking everyone that you're going to see in the country, getting their contact details, contacting them quite often, taking your electronics off. Normally you have to open them up so they can look at your emails, like all of that stuff. People have their contents from their laptops downloaded and so forth. So it is intrusive, and it is not something that happens in other places to many people.
And I think until it happens to someone that is white or has privilege, I don't think it's really talked about. There's an Australian lady recently, I don't know if you saw the story, and I can't remember why it came about, but she'd traveled to Israel and there was a case of mistaken identity. They actually thought she was someone else, which is irrelevant, but she was interrogated so badly. They put handcuffs on her. And then when they realized that she was someone else, they took the handcuffs off her and told her she could go. They just suddenly realized that it was the wrong thing.
Poor lady.
And then she said, like, I've never experienced this in my life. And she said, I am so sympathetic now to Palestinians and what potentially happens to them on the ground, or any Arab coming through the airport. Because this was done to me, and just because of a case of mistaken identity. So can you imagine what it's like on a daily basis for people traveling through the airport? And not everyone can travel through that airport.
No, it's only people like me that have a foreign passport or whatever, but West Bank residents are not allowed. They have to apply for permits to go out through the bridge, to go through Jordan. Everything is difficult if you're a Palestinian. So back to Rachel. Her writings and her story left a profound mark. Her diaries and emails, like I said, they were turned into a London stage play, and then it went all around the world. Her parents established the Rachel Corrie Foundation for Peace and Justice, which supports grassroots efforts for human rights and calls for an end to the Israeli apartheid in Palestine. That's in quotation marks, their words. Indeed, Rachel's life and death have been told and retold in stories, poems, documentaries, songs, books, articles, and so forth. A lot of them are in my sources. She has become an icon of nonviolent resistance, an American who literally stood up in the way of injustice. Rachel Corrie's fate also cast a spotlight on the systematic policy of housing demolitions and collective punishments that Israel was carrying out at the time and to this day. Human Rights Watch report noted that over 1,000 Palestinian homes in Gaza had been destroyed by Israel in that campaign alone. Her story forced many outside observers to confront the human cost of Israel's military occupation. The timing, March 2003, was also notable because it was just when the US was invading Iraq. And so Rachel's death sparked difficult questions back home in the States about the blind support of Israel's policy and the blind assumptions of how evil Arabs are, let's say. Yet, despite the outcry and Rachel's personal sacrifice, Gaza's plight would only deepen in the years to come. So I'm going to quickly go over what's happened in Gaza since. A year after Rachel's death, the situation in Gaza shifted dramatically, and not for the better. Surprise, surprise. In 2005, Israel unilaterally disengaged from the Gaza Strip. So what that meant was they pulled out the 8,000 settlers that were in Gaza and the troops that were inside Gaza out of Gaza. They sold this as a positive. Look how good we're being. You know, we're taking our troops and our settlers, illegal settlers, out of Gaza. But in reality,
So
it
they
was,
can do it when they want to.
yes, this is exactly it. One of the arguments is, oh, it's too difficult. No, you did it to Gaza. And I want us to say that there's different kinds of settlers. There's religious settlers and there's like economic settlers. There's people that are, and these settlements, some of them are bigger than the city of Tel Aviv, right? So some of them are like caravans and others are whole cities with universities, shopping malls, car dealerships,
Oh,
etc.
yeah.
You've seen them, right? So settlements in itself implies like little campgrounds or something. The religious ones pick the locations because they're like something in the Bible happened there or whatever. And they're quite often they're the
And it's
Orthodox
obviously
Jews,
true.
of course. So they are really difficult to deal with because you're not dealing with ration,
Rational human
you're dealing
beings.
with religious, Orthodox religious people. Then you have the economic ones. There's a lot of financial incentives to move to different settlements. They build roads so that they're really easy to get into Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. So they're commuter belts. The whole area is really small, right? So it's quite easy if you've got good roads to drive across the country. Those ones are a little bit easier to discuss and deal with because these are people that are making like decisions on economics and lifestyle or whatever. It's a little bit easier to relate or to discuss, to negotiate, let's say. The ones in Gaza were all religious. And also I want to point out that Israel
Why was
society,
that?
because it wasn't economically or socially interesting to live in Gaza, for
What was the religious angle? Like why in Gaza? I'm not clear on what the
because they wanted
religious
to help keep
aspects.
the whole of Israel as one. So they felt like it was very important as they
Right.
were there maintaining Israeli presence in all
Got you.
areas.
I see. Okay, I
But
understand now.
as you know, Israel society is not cohesive. There's a lot of friction between the religious Jews, especially the Orthodox Jews, and
Orthodox, yeah.
the non-religious communities or the more liberal communities. The Orthodox in particular, they don't work. They have lots of kids because that's their job according to God, and they claim benefits and they don't fight in the army. So that causes a lot of friction with the other remaining populations that are either not religious or religious but more liberal, that do have to work and do have to fight in the army and don't have as many kids. And you know what I mean? It's important to remember that there are conflicting views within Israel as well.
And also when you think about voting rights as well, so the Orthodox ones who have everything paid for them, who get moved to somewhere, who have schooling paid, who have, I mean, think about the schooling anyway, but they have everything paid for them and they have voting rights.
On an army that they're not involved in. So it's very easy to send someone else's kids off to fucking battle, isn't it?
And
So
also they get to vote and say, oh, I get everything paid for me. Yes, I'm going to vote for this crazy person to stay in power. Of
exactly.
course they are.
So it's important to note that much of Israel was not very supportive of these settlers in Gaza. They weren't, I'm not saying they were happy for them to be moved, but they saw them as a pain. They were like a religious element of the society, which was quite disruptive. They were in Gaza. They had to have, for each settler, there was 8,000, they had to have 3 soldiers there to protect them. So expensive to maintain those settlements that no one really saw the benefit of apart from those people that were there. But symbolically, they didn't want to have them removed necessarily.
Of course.
But they were easy, low-hanging fruit. So it wasn't in Israel's best interest to maintain these annoying, non-strategic settlements in Gaza that were expensive and causing a lot of disruption. But once they removed all their soldiers and their civilians from Gaza, it was so much easier to completely maintain control of the borders, the coastline, the airspace, and create this blockade on Gaza. And that's what we saw happening. In 2006, we had elections, one of the most monitored elections in the entire world by the international community, because everyone was so concerned about making sure it was done fairly, legally, et cetera, et cetera. We had Fatah, our secular party, got the leadership positions, but the legislative elections, the majority of our MPs, let's say, were Hamas. Hamas is an Islamist party. I don't agree with religion and politics mixing in this way, but you have to think about Hamas like Sinn Féin or the ANC in South Africa. Yes, they have their military wing, but they eventually gained legitimate political roles And whether you saw their military wing as freedom fighters or terrorists depended entirely on like the general consensus of the world and whether you agreed with their cause or not. So we still have a Fatah president, a secular party, but we have a lot of the legislative roles being Hamas. Israel responded by tightening the blockade even further on Gaza, sealing it off from the rest of the world, which meant that it was almost impossible for the Gaza and West Bank governments to work together. So they split too. So now you have Gaza isolated politically as well as geographically. It meant that at the time, the 1.8 million Palestinians living in Gaza were now trapped in what was now being called an open air prison. Gaza is the most densely populated area in the whole world. It's half the size of the Isle of Wight. It's now got more than 2 million people living there. Less so, we don't know the full numbers because obviously we've had a lot of deaths recently. The whole of Israel and Palestine is about the size of Wales. So it's just important to remember the distances and so forth are really small. The geographic size is so tiny. The United Nations still considers Gaza as occupied, even though there's no Israelis technically inside Gaza, because of the Israelis' blockade and the periodic military incursions, which just basically means they still have complete control over the area. And so therefore, it's still illegally occupied. It's just that Jerusalem, the rest of the West Bank, and Gaza have different forms of occupation, which make it even more complicated, confusing, difficult to negotiate and navigate around. In the decade after Rachel Corrie's death, Gaza endured 3 major wars that inflicted horrific casualties and destruction on the population. The first was Operation Cast Lead. This was winter 2008 to 2009. Israel launched a 22-day offensive following the breakdown of a truce with Hamas. It was unprecedented at the time, and 1,400 Palestinians were killed. The majority of them were civilians, including over 300 children. Because I want to emphasize that Gaza's population is a really young population. So 47% are under the age of 18. And this is why you hear a lot of people calling this a war on children. Because whatever you're doing, mass civilian attacks are horrendous and illegal anyways. But 47% of those casualties will inevitably be children. And one thing I will say, like I talked about this before, that I remember always, like, I hate the terms when people say, oh, and you know, X% were women and children, as if our men are all terrorists, but also as if our women are not involved in our resistance movement, you know? And the reason why, for example, there was one article by the BBC that said, oh, but, you know, it must have been fairly successful because there were X amount of men killed. Again, not all our men are terrorists. Again, imagine if you had your brothers, your fathers, your friends, your boyfriends assumed that they were terrorists because they're male and of a certain age. But also, do you know why there was a large portion of men that died? Because they're out there working as paramedics, humanitarian workers. They're going out trying to find food, resources, and so forth for their parents, for their families, and so forth. You had entire neighborhoods that were bombarded into rubble. So again, 1,400 Palestinians died, 13 Israelis, 10 of whom were soldiers. So there's always this story of lopsided death tolls, right? And I'm not going to downplay the civilian loss. I'm not even going to downplay the Israeli soldier losses because it's a conscription army. So those people are not in the army by choice necessarily. It's just worth noting that it's always a disproportionate outcome and by a lot, because this is an occupier with like the 4th largest army in the world versus the occupied, you know, so this is not equal footing military-wise either. A UN fact-finding mission afterwards found evidence of war crimes on both sides by the Israeli military and by Palestinian armed groups. For example, citing that Israel was using white phosphorus in civilian areas. Now, white phosphorus is allowed to be used. It glows like fireworks, right? It's allowed to be used according to the rules of war, but as like a kind of lighting technique and on specific targets or whatever. Israel was shooting them in civilian areas directly at children. And one of the reasons why this is against the rules of law is because white phosphorus just burns straight through. Cast Lead, the Operation Cast Lead, left Gaza physically shattered. More than 20,000 people were left homeless, with some 3,500 homes completely destroyed. And obviously the emotional toll, the psychological toll on everyone. And I'm reading this and it sounds like nothing compared to today, but trust me, at the time,
I know.
this was unprecedented and it was just awful. Only 4 years later came Operation Pillar of Defense in November 2012. This was shorter. It was only 1 week, but it was still fucking devastating. It began with Israel's targeted killing of a top Hamas commander, which led to an exchange of fire. Can I remind you at this point that Hamas were our elected government? So imagine if someone came along and just shot Keir Starmer or one of his cabinet.
Democratically elected government at the time.
What would the response be? Over 8 days of Israeli air bombardments. There was no ground incursions this time, so no risk in theory to Israeli soldiers. So approximately 171 Palestinians that were killed in 1 week, including more than 100 civilians. On the Israeli side, 6 people were killed by Hamas rockets. 4 of them were civilians. Images of blasted buildings and families, grief-stricken families in Gaza, once again filled our media, our papers, social media, and so forth. A ceasefire was brokered, but nothing happened to sort of address the root causes, and Gaza was still under siege, an open-air prison. But there was worse still to come. In the summer of 2014, a new conflict ignited after the kidnapping and killing of 3 Israeli teens in the West Bank and a surge of rocket fire from Gaza. Israel responded with Operation Protective Edge in July-August 2014, a 50-day war that was the deadliest to date for Palestinians in Gaza. The Israeli Air Force and artillery pummeled the strip for weeks and weeks and weeks, and ground forces moved in on several fronts. By the time the ceasefire was reached in late August, 2,251 Palestinians had been killed, including at least 1,462 civilians. So more than half, because again, most of the time it's Israel saying how many were civilians and how many were Hamas. And also, again, there's a difference between the political Hamas wing and the military wing, Among them were 551 children and 299 women. Again, our men are not all terrorists. So on the Israeli side, 73 were killed, 67 were soldiers, and 6 were civilian. Lopsided again. A lot of them, I will say, a lot of the civilians are from towns and kibbutzim, which is the plural of kibbutz, along the border of Gaza. So in Israel, but near Gaza. Again, everything is quite close, right? But I want to say that there's a romanticized view of the kibbutz. They are very different as well. You have the religious kibbutz and you have the more secular ones, and you have the ones that lean more to the right, and you have some that lean to the left. But what I will say, you remember, like, there was always stories of like hippies going to spend time in the kibbutz in the 60s and 70s. I want to say that they were the original settler colonies, right? They were founded by Zionist immigrants, the original ones. They were not neutral farming collectives, as people make out, like little co-ops or whatever. They were strategic settlement outposts intended to establish facts on the ground for a future Jewish state. They were located on or near contested land, often displacing Palestinian farmers. They only employed Jewish labor originally. Some of them have become a bit more open, but those are very few percentage. They reinforced separation between the Israelis and the Jewish and the Palestinians. Many were fortified and served as bases for the original militias, the Haganah militias that eventually became the IDF. Many kibbutzim expanded into, here's a term I hate, depopulated Palestinian villages, because after 1948, when the State of Israel was born, there was a lot of depopulated Palestinian villages. What do you mean
annihilated?
Yes. How were they depopulated? They were massacred or evicted. There's about 530 such villages. Again, remember, in a place the size of Wales, 530 villages where people were either massacred, evicted, or both. At the time, 1948, when some of these original kibbutzim were set up, 700,000 refugee Palestinians, and that equals 40% of our population. That's a large percentage. Sorry, like I said, there's going to be so many sidebars, but it's just every time I mention the term, I want to go into it. And there's so many nuances and so many things that are just used incorrectly or thought of in a certain way or whatever.
But I think it's really good because then people can like grab bits and research certain aspects. It is really helpful.
So going back to this third attack on Gaza, I struggle to use the word war. Again, going back to the nuances, a war implies that there's 2 equal powers, or at least that there's equal status in the eyes of the world or whatever. But this is the illegal occupier versus the occupied, and it always bears remembering. The onslaught completely flattened entire districts. It's estimated that 18,000 housing units were destroyed or severely damaged. And remember, family units meaning like 40 or 50 members of a family will be living in that unit. You know what I mean? There were tens of thousands of families displaced with nowhere to go, nowhere to return to. Critical infrastructure was wrecked, as we know, because we worked in this. Schools, hospitals, power lines, sewage systems, electrical supply places, etc., including some of the hospitals that we were directly responsible for funding and supporting, right? The UN later reported that 500,000 Gazans, 28% of the population were made homeless at the height of the 2014 fighting. 28%, nearly a third of the population were homeless during this time. You know, imagine if 28% of London became homeless overnight. This left a scar on Gaza that has never healed because we've never even had the chance to heal from it. People are still living in the ruins of their homes that were never rebuilt under the same Israeli blockade that strangled the economy and impeded reconstruction. So I said that Israel controls the borders completely. They control entirely what goes in and out of Gaza. Nothing really comes out. But in terms of going in, humanitarian aid, right? The list of things that have been banned over time from going in, because in theory, parts or all of it could be used potentially for to make weapons or whatever, is ridiculous. Okay? So here are some of the things that have been on the list of restricted items going into Gaza. Jam, t-shirts, biscuits, coriander, cardamom, sage, pasta, fabric, shoes, crayons, writing paper, candles, matches, blankets, toys, musical instruments. And then I think you can see how that will greatly impede education and sustenance, feeding people. But also things like fertilizer, spare parts for machinery and vehicles, again, a largely agricultural people, right? And then in terms of reconstruction, we've had 3 wars now. Everything's being fucking destroyed. Concrete, wood thicker than 2 centimeters, iron, steel, and so forth. And that's not even touching on medicine and vaccinations. We have babies dying in Gaza from preventable diseases because we can't get basic vaccinations and medicines in. That should not happen anywhere in the world to this day. For the next several years, Gaza endured flare-ups every now and then, and this relentless blockade. It meant that everything was scarce. Fuel. I've not even touched on how you wouldn't have electricity throughout the day. You know, we were working for
certain times.
Hospital, we had to have generators and so forth, but like most homes didn't have that. So you basically might get 2 hours of electricity in a day.
And water is another thing.
Exactly. By the early 2020s, foreign activists were rarely seen in Gaza. Israel generally barred humanitarian workers and observers and journalists from entering, especially after 2006 when Hamas took control. I mean, I think I went into Gaza like 2016-ish, and it was just horrendous. Like, it had changed so much from when I used to go there when I was younger, when it used to be where we'd go to the seaside and have nice fish and have a swim and so forth. I
remember when I went in, it was about 2015. I don't know if I went in just before you or just after you.
And again, the only reason we managed to get in because we worked for this organization that definitely had a huge privilege because of its long history in the area and connections and so forth.
Do you know, I remember when I got in, I was with Paul, and when I got in, we had to go through like the Palestinian Authority and then the Israeli.
Who's Paul? Paul, who was our facilities
dear friend who works at St. John, and so we got in, and then I remember we get picked up by a taxi driver in Gaza, and I remember the taxi had a big hole in the back of it where I could see the ground moving under me. So I was just like sitting in the back of this taxi, taking it all in with my feet to the side and looking in this massive hole. And I just remember how lovely everyone was. There was not like tons and tons and tons and tons of food. Like, we were going to a restaurant and it was like by the sea, and they were desperate for us to try the fish, but they couldn't fish far out because Israel wouldn't let them fish in deeper water. So you had smaller fish, you had like baby fish and stuff. And they did explain it to us.
which is unsustainable, obviously, but we just have
Completely.
no choice.
And just everything was bombed to bits then when I went in, or
Yeah.
it seemed that way. And then I look at it now, and what I saw was absolutely nothing compared to anything now of what we saw.
The general theme is you think it can't get worse, and then it does. So a resilient civil society in Gaza kept Rachel Corrie's spirit alive. Peaceful protests did occur, such as the Great March of Return demonstrations in 2018. Some of you will remember this is a lot of remember this wheelchair activist who I think got killed waving a flag. It was basically thousands of Gazans who would start approaching the fence demanding their rights. So it's surrounded by a fence and a wall, obviously. It's literally open air prison. And there is a buffer zone. You're not allowed to approach that wall.
Yeah.
They were approaching to demand their rights, only to be met with live fire. More than 200 Palestinians were killed during the protests, and over 36,000 Palestinians were injured. This is peaceful protests, Through it all, the people of Gaza remembered those internationals who had stood with them. But now we have a new catastrophe. So I'm going to touch on this because, like I said, we've had so many questions, and I get that it's so complicated, but it's also so simple. But I wanted to give everyone a little bit of a understanding of what's happened since October 7th. It was early morning, 7th of October. Fighters from Hamas broke through the Israeli perimeter fences and attacked military bases and towns in southern Israel. And they killed approximately 1,200 people, a lot of them Israeli civilians, and captured around 240 hostages, bringing them back into Gaza. Now, I've talked about this before. This was the day that me and my dad actually flew back to Jerusalem to visit family, and we got stuck out there. But what that meant was while I was out there, I was watching footage of what was happening that I have not seen or been able to find online since I got back. So I wonder if Israel's managed to clean the internet of it. And the main thing that I've not been able to find, because I at the time couldn't believe my eyes, but the things that managed to confuse and work around and defeat the Israeli army, again, fourth largest army in the world, looked like it come out of Wacky Races or Soapbox Derby, because basically, I don't even need you to imagine it, because what I did, I couldn't find images of these contraptions. So I made AI generate it for me. So I got ChatGPT to generate what the footage was. And it's actually surprisingly accurate to what we were seeing. Because what we had was, I'm going to bring it up and then I'll explain it. This is the contraptions that managed to breach the wall and the sniper watchtowers and get into Israel itself. Okay.
Okay. So what we're seeing is a motorbike with what do you call, that's a generator in the back.
It's like a fan from, an air conditioner, a large air conditioner fan, the kind that you have to put outside or hang out the window, whatever. And they had paragliding kind of parachutes. So it's two guys on a motorcycle, one with this aircon fan strapped to the back and one with a paraglider, a parasail. I don't know what the words are. That's how they supposedly managed to get over the wall. It's just bonkers. It's I'm sorry, no one saw this coming, right? It's just very bizarre. So this was an unprecedented attack, and I will allow the use of the word unprecedented. What I will not tolerate is the use of surprise attack or unprovoked attack, because I think we can agree it's not a fucking surprise to anyone. And to call it unprovoked is to dismiss our suffering for the last several decades. So the unprecedented, definitely. It never happened that they'd managed to break in, and have an incursion into Israel in this extent. Israel's government, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, declared a state of war and vowed to destroy Hamas. I haven't even in this episode, because it will take too long and it might be a separate episode, gone into the crimes of Benjamin Netanyahu. But in a nutshell, the minute this war is over, he faces trial for corruption and a whole bunch of other things, and he's going to jail, 100%. So his vested interest is in keeping this war going, because he's going to jail as soon as it finishes. So he declared a state of war. But like I said, I showed you the contraptions. I find it very unbelievable that they would manage to plan and carry out this attack with these ridiculous fucking wacky races. It's not Soapbox Derby. It's the one where they have to jump off the high tower and travel as far into the water as possible. That's what it reminded me of. We know that this happens in history. I kind of feel was it something they knew was coming that they allowed to happen so that they could carry out this plan that they had for Gaza? Israel responded with an all-out military assault on Gaza. Within hours of the attack, Israeli warplanes had begun bombing Gaza. Netanyahu also imposed a total siege on the area, cutting off electricity, water, food, and fuel, and medical supplies for the entire civilian population. As the amazing Dalal Irikat said, she's a phenomenal spokesperson on this issue. If you are discussing international humanitarian law, it's usually because someone is potentially committing a war crime. And I would like to say, if you're debating about whether something is a war crime or not, chances are either way, it's really horrendous for the people involved. The rationale given was that nothing would reopen until the hostages were freed, but the effect was collective punishment on 2.3 million people. And now is the time that I want to talk about hostages. So as of mid-2025, June time, sources report that there are 3,562 administrative detainees. That's what our hostages are often called. These are people that are in prison without charge or trial. So they are illegally detained by most people's standards, most countries' standards. And that's a stat from the Israeli prison service, okay? June 30th, 2023, 147 children are being held in administrative detention. There are more.
Well, that's going to go up. That's going to have gone up in the last 2 years.
There's many more in military detention. These are in administrative detention, meaning, again, no charge, no trial. And they are children. If they're in the West Bank, they are held in military jails. So these, I would argue, are Palestinian hostages. And many of them have been held for decades. When I tell you that it's decades, I'm not exaggerating. A friend of mine, her dad was in jail for 20 plus years in administrative detention. No charge, no trial. Yes, free the hostages, but fucking free all of them, you know? And if these people have done something wrong, fine, charge them fairly and try them fairly. But you can't hold them for decades without anything and then not call them a fucking hostage, right? So throughout October 2023, there were airstrikes, Israeli airstrikes on residential areas, markets, schools, mosques. The mass casualties climbed every single day. In one of the war's most horrific single attacks, October 17th, an explosion ripped through the crowded courtyard of the Al-Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza City, where thousands of displaced families were taking shelter. So these hospitals and schools, they weren't just like working in the medical field, they were housing refugees as well. Hundreds of people were killed in the blast. Some estimate over 500, including patients, doctors, and of course, many of them children. The outrage was global. There were images, because of social media, of charred bodies and burning cars and houses and schools and so forth. So finally, there was mass condemnation around the world. Welcome to the party. Thank you for being here. You know, as Israeli forces pressed their offensive, entire districts of Gaza were flattened under bombardment. It's horrible when you think about it. Because again, remember I said, like, in Gaza, a lot of the families were living together. You'd have extended families living in one building or one area. So some sources claim that 1,410 whole Gazan families have been completely erased, whole families, as of August 2025, as a result of Israeli bombing. The Israeli military ordered over 1 million residents of northern Gaza to evacuate their homes and flee south and then go back up north again. You remember they were getting told to go left, right, center.
And how'd you do that with all your stuff and your family? And like, when I say all your stuff, like these are like, what would you grab, Dee?
Exactly. So exactly that. I've just posted on the Britain Palestine Project website an interview with a Gazan journalist, and he was like, you know, many of these people are children or the elderly or people that aren't able to carry things. And are you going to leave without a mattress, a blanket? What do you take? Many are old, many are infirm. Also, Israel was saying, flee to this area because we won't bomb you here. And then they would bomb them there. So they're like, well, we're not necessarily safer there. At least let us fucking die in our homes in some comfort. So it's a lot of misunderstanding, confusion, and so forth about all of that. And then late October, Israeli ground troops moved in. So at this point, we have like most of the population being displaced at some point within Gaza. Food, water, etc., fuel, all of that's running low. If it's available, it's fucking expensive. Humza Yousaf, former First Minister of Scotland, leader of the SNP, his wife is Gazan. He said he managed to send over a couple of $100s because it's very difficult to send money over to Gaza. And it bought like 10 items. of food. So there's an international outcry that we had, as Palestinians, had finally waited. I tried not to let this be an "I told you so" moment, but honestly, it felt my whole life. People thought I was lying or exaggerating about how bad the occupation was. And obviously, it did get worse dramatically for Gaza during this time, but people finally got it. And it's a shame that we had to be victims of genocide as a people to finally get people to realize. But yes, better late than never. So we have millions of people worldwide taking to the streets in solidarity for Gaza and for Palestinians and asking for a ceasefire. Who would have thought asking for a ceasefire was a controversial thing? But apparently it is. And I cannot tell you how much it means to us as Palestinians here and there to see all of these people who have no skin in the game, no need to get involved, going out on the streets and shouting for our rights. Because you can bet your ass that the people in Gaza, like I said, they're seeing what's happening in the rest of the world too. So they're seeing that. And finally, they're feeling like we've not been forgotten. In London, protesters were chanting, this chant. I think of all the demonstrations I've gone to, and like I said, you see all these British people who have no skin in the game chanting this. In our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. This is when me and my dad finally decided to try to get back. You just feel the need to be with your people in your homeland, around people that understand what you're going through. We didn't even speak about it, but we just knew like neither of us were in a rush to come back
desperate,
to a country that was reacting like that to something that was so awful that was happening in our country. But when we saw people coming to the streets and protesting against what was happening to us, that was when we were like, okay, let's go home. Also, our mom was guilt tripping us. My mom was guilt tripping us mega badly. So yeah, that's when we started trying to work out how to get home. In Washington, D.C., thousands rallied outside the White House. Bear in mind, this is still Biden, Democrats, right, in charge. This was before Trump was reelected. So they're chanting, Biden, Biden, you can't hide. You signed up for genocide. One thing, like, don't get me wrong, I fucking hate Trump, right? But do not think for a second that Biden was much better for us. He might have even been worse, but Biden was bad for Palestinians. Unconditional financial and military support for Israel, arms trades, blocked UN resolutions. He opposed investigations from the International Criminal Courts into war crimes. Why are you opposing them? If you think they're not there, that they're not being committed, just let the fucking ICC prove that they're not being committed. But no. And absolutely no pressure on Israel to end the occupation when they're arguably one of the powers in the world that might be able to use some influence in the area. So week after week through late 2023, these demonstrations only grew. And at long last, the world recognized the scale of the Palestinian suffering and finally became unwilling to be silent. The United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly in late October 2023 for a resolution demanding an immediate humanitarian truce, although Israel, backed by the US, ignored it. In January 2023, the International Court of Justice, responding to an urgent case brought by a bunch of countries, issued an order calling on Israel to prevent genocide, in quotes, against the Palestinians of Gaza. The International Court of Justice stated that it found a plausible risk of genocide in the conduct of the war and reminded Israel of its obligations under the Genocide Convention. Around the same time, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, prosecutor also warned that indiscriminate attacks on civilians and the use of starvation as a method of warfare could constitute genocide or crimes against humanity. Under mounting pressure, Israel and Hamas did agree to a brief ceasefire in late November 2023. For about 7 days, it lasted, as a couple of hostages were exchanged. Hamas released dozens of Israeli and foreign civilian hostages, while Israel freed several dozen Palestinian women and minors from its prisons, because again, all our men are terrorists. Gaza also saw a trickle of humanitarian aid convoys enter during those days. I want to talk about this because, like I said, I've already talked about some of the restricted items, but the humanitarian aid coming into Gaza, and I haven't talked about this either, but they kicked out the UN organization that was responsible for this, UNRWA, which again, I'm baffled about how this could happen and the rest of the world doesn't care. You know what happened when Iraq wouldn't let the UN investigators in? They kicked them out. They then hired mercenaries to provide the humanitarian aid. Surprise, surprise, these unregulated mercenaries have been killing people regularly that are trying to get food from these humanitarian aid points. They've recently hired a motorcycle gang that have a long history of being Islamophobic. Gaza is mainly a Muslim population. So why is this not working out well? But in recent days, for example, only 30 UN trucks per day have been allowed inside Gaza, 30 trucks of UN humanitarian aid. It's estimated that 500 to 600 aid trucks per day are required to meet basic humanitarian needs. So 30 allowed in recently, and these are highs apparently. Gaza needs 500 to 600 aid trucks per day. The truce was fragile. It lasted about a week, and the killing continued. Full-scale fighting resumed. By December 2023, 15,000 Palestinians were killed. By January 2024, it was 20,000. These are by direct warfare, so by direct action. So we're not including those that have starved, those that have died in other indirect causes, let's say. As of March 2024, Gaza's death toll exceeded 30,000 people, 15 times higher than the number of Israelis killed on the 7th of October. So at this point, you can think like, have we sought revenge enough, maybe? I also wanted to just note that a lot of Israelis in Israel itself think that the images coming out of Gaza are AI generated. I know I just did that, but I was very clear that that was an image that I generated by AI.
Yeah.
The children starving, where you could see their fucking ribs, or the ones where their limbs are fucking blown off, those are real. So the public outcry is very large. And in the United Kingdom, historically a strong Israeli supporter, we even had a march where 1 million people took to the streets on the 11th of November, 2023. Politicians are now openly using the words genocide, apartheid, and so forth to describe Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Like I said, I'm putting all of the links in the bios to all of these things that support the use of these words. We can use these words now. We're not fucking exaggerating. They shouldn't be taboo. They shouldn't be like, I mean, the acts should be, but the use of the words to describe those acts should not be. This global chorus of outrage and empathy has given many Palestinians a bittersweet sense of hope. Yes, it was at the cost of our suffering. Maybe, perhaps, we will now be a force to be reckoned with. I mentioned that I went to Slovenia. Their foreign minister, Tanja Fajon, I hope I'm saying her name right, is amazing. History will not be kind to hesitation. It will remember those who stood silent when genocide unfolded. So for Palestinians like those who knew and loved Rachel Corrie, i.e. all of us, this moment, as horrific as it is, affirms why people like her stood up in the first place. Rachel gave her life trying to stop the very kind of injustice that's now unfolding in Gaza on a massive scale. Today's wave of solidarity, where people of all backgrounds chant Free Palestine and demand an end to the killing, is something of a vindication for the sacrifices of the early activists and all of the Palestinians that are living in suffering. It's tragic that it took openly witnessing mass atrocities and war crimes and a genocide for the world to wake up. But many Palestinians are grateful that at last their narrative is being heard. We know that Rachel Corrie would have been on the forefront of these protests if she were alive today, and the world has been deprived of an amazing human. You know, imagine what that woman would have done if she had was allowed to live her whole life. In the word of Rachel's Gaza host sister, Noor Nasrallah, again, one of the children of the family, when brute force replaces law, history will unapologetically remember those who did not speak out. We need the world to speak out now. Rachel Corrie was one of the many international allies who have lost their lives standing up for Palestinians. She wasn't the only one. So I want to honor some of the people who also lost their lives, because sadly, she's not the only case. Tom Herndl is one that we have a personal link in history with. He was 22-year-old. He was a photography student and again, ISM volunteer. On the 11th of April, this is a month after Rachel Corrie, Tom was shot in the head by an Israeli sniper when he was pulling Palestinian children to safety. They were playing football, a bunch of young Palestinian kids. They were shot at. And him and I think some other definitely some other Palestinians, but also I think a couple of other ISM volunteers, i.e. visible, high vis, right?
Yeah.
Started bringing these kids to safety. And he went out several times to retrieve children and bring them back. And he was shot in the head. He got brought back to the UK because he was still alive. He lay in a coma for about 9 months. before he passed away. My parents were with his parents when they found out that it was time to turn off the life support. An Israeli soldier was actually convicted of manslaughter in Tom's case. This was a rare case of partial accountability. They blamed the soldier rather than the policy of the army at the time. I would also like to say that I don't think that happened. This is my opinion, but I have a lot of people that also have this opinion. I don't think that soldier would have been charged if he wasn't from the Druze Bedouin community. It's a bit sticky whether they count themselves as Palestinians or not, but they are Bedouin, Druze, Arabs that often fight in the army because they have come to a deal with Israel, but some of them do fight in the army. Yeah, so basically they weren't Israeli Jews. And was it convenient that we could scapegoat this guy anyways? Jim Miller, British, 34-year-old award-winning journalist and filmmaker who was in Gaza in 2003, making a documentary about Palestinian children. While on the 2nd of May, 2003, while he and his colleagues, who were clearly marked as press with TV helmets and white flags, were leaving a home in Rafah at night, an Israeli soldier shot him in the neck, killing him. Witnesses described the shooting as calculated, cold-blooded murder, and that the soldier knew the journalists' identities. No one was ever charged. An inquest in 2006 recorded as an unlawful killing and pointed to a particular Israeli lieutenant as the likely shooting. Jim Miller's harrowing documentary, Death in Gaza, was finished by his colleagues and released. Shireen Abu Akleh I'm putting her in here, she was Palestinian, but she was Palestinian American. And so we were like, why don't the Americans care more about their own civilians, right? She was shot and killed by an IDF sniper on the 11th of May, 2022, so much more recently, while reporting on an Israeli raid in a Jenin refugee camp. She was wearing a helmet and a vest marked press. Her killing caused international uproar. Her coffin was attacked at her funeral.
I remember this one.
Yeah,
and I remember this one.
As we know, I can't remember, it's something like 275, I think, is the number of journalists that have been killed in Gaza since the 7th of October. Again, frowned upon, to say the least. So we've got the Gaza Freedom Flotilla of 2010, which I want to mention because we currently, but hopefully by the time this is released, they would have reached Gaza, have another Freedom Flotilla on its way to Gaza. But in 2010, there was an initial Freedom Flotilla, and I think it was 9 or 10 boats. In international waters, Israel boarded one of the boats and shot and killed 9 people, the youngest being 19. I have friends that were in this flotilla. They were brought back to Israel. They were in prison. They were detained without food, water, access to lawyers, consulate, anything. So hopefully this flotilla doesn't face the same. They have already been attacked by Israel, and you have Spain and Italy, I think, have sent warships out to protect them because it's illegal to attack ships in international waters.
But they're only going to protect them up until a certain point, they've said.
So there are other names too. Brian Avery, shot in the face by Israeli soldiers in 2003. He was American. He survived, but he's been disfigured. Vittorio Arrigoni, Italian activist who lived in Gaza, was killed by extremists in 2011, etc., 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 etc. Like, there are too many to list now of foreigners killed and wounded. But these individuals came from outside and chose to put themselves in harm's way for the greater cause than themselves. They could have lived a quiet, comfortable life, and instead they acted out of a profound sense of injustice and shared humanity. It's bitterly ironic and yet fitting that Rachel's case is being revisited now, but she stood up when so few in the West would. She supported us before it was cool. She reminds us that solidarity is not a trend, but it's a lifelong commitment to justice. Again, as Humza Yousaf, the former Scottish First Minister and leader of SNP, said, we have to face our kids and our grandkids one day when they will ask us, where were we? What did we do when the genocide was happening? So as a Palestinian reflecting on her legacy, I feel a swell of sadness and gratitude. Sadness that Rachel and others have had to dive to pierce the world's indifference, but gratitude that they finally did not turn away. In her diary, she wrote to fellow activists, this is Rachel's words again, we have to show each other how effective, important, and courageous our work is. People without privilege will be doing this work no matter what, because they are working for their lives. We can work with them, or we can leave them to do this work and themselves and curse us for our complicity in killing them. And that's it. Do you want to be complicit or do you want to do something about it? She chose to work with the oppressed, not to leave us alone. Today, at long last, the world is watching Gaza. The world is saying enough. So may her memory and the memory of all those who dedicated their lives to Palestine and to curing injustice be a blessing and a call to an action. So, fuck, I need an Ink-Quisition.
You need an Ink-Quisition. Rachel sounds like just amazing. I am going to get some Rachel merch. I'm going to read her book. I don't know what other people are going to do, but I'm going to read more about her because I did know stuff, Dee, but I didn't know half of that.
The play, I'm holding it up now. You can see it's a tiny slip of a thing. It's not a long thing. So it's a real quick read, but will stay with you for a long time.
I know, I'm going to do that.
Yeah. I mean, what a legend. I was a little bit nervous about doing this topic because although I wanted to frame it within the one case, the Rachel Corrie case, it obviously draws in so much stuff that's like a wider political issue. I would argue still counts as true crime, just on a international level rather than like a case by case basis. I was worried because I'd had a conversation with someone at CrimeCon who was like, oh, we don't touch on politics on our true crime podcast. And I was thinking, how is that possible? Because most of these true crime cases bring in some elements of politics, right? Whether it's a misogynistic culture that leads to a lot of crimes against women, or whether it's something to do with race.
It governments? Maybe they don't cover anything specifically in governments. Because it's such a big topic, Dee. It's such a massive topic, and you're an expert on it. You know, I think that you forget, or maybe you don't forget, but you shouldn't forget how much knowledge you have and how much of an expert you are and how comfortable you are talking about it. I think that a lot of people don't touch politics because it's not a scary subject, but they don't want to do it. Like they feel like maybe they can't do it, justice.
And I didn't want people turning away from this issue because of a lack of understanding of the basics of it, or being nervous to talk about it because they feel like they don't understand it. No one expects you to understand the full history, everything that went on with the peace accords and this, that, and the other. There's a lot, and I don't understand a lot of it either. But I wanted to make sure that I covered a lot of the basics and hopefully give people confidence to talk about it to some extent, in the understanding that they don't have the full knowledge. But here's what I know and here's what I think. And like I said, some of it is super complicated. A lot of it is not. Do we want babies dying? No. So let's stop it. Is the long and the short of it, right? Do we want innocent people dying? No. Do we want people to live in peace? Yes. Do we want people to have equal rights? Yes. That's the whole theme of our podcast in general, right? I think that if people didn't want to know more about Palestine or it bothered them hearing it, we wouldn't be the podcast for them, because since day one, we've talked about it a lot. And then when I saw your jumper, I was reassured. I was like, yes, this is the right thing to do, because again, Palestinian keffiyeh jumper is an issue that's so close to our heart. We won't stop talking about it. Maybe when there's a day when there's peace and justice for all, we can stop talking about it as much. But if we're honest, that's a long way into the future. And until then, we're not going to stop talking about it. We want people to be informed on the issue. We want people to talk about the issue. We want people to talk to their MPs about the issue, talk to their friends, colleagues, whatever. Let's keep on talking about it.
And ask questions. I think that people, if people have got questions to ask, I think that I can imagine people being intimidated talking to you. Now, and I say this as a friend because I think that people will see that you have all this knowledge and that they might be worried to speak to you about it because they don't know anything about it. So what would you say to someone that's scared to come up to you and start talking to you about it? What would you say to them?
Again, I don't expect people to have the full history in their back pocket. And I talk to people regularly working on this issue that have far more knowledge than me. So I get it. I don't expect people to know everything about this issue, but it's so nice to have a bit of solidarity. So even if you feel like you don't get it. Like Carl Chin at CrimeCon. Do you know what he said to me? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's so sweet.
He said,
Sorry, he was just
Salam
such
alaikum. He said he greeted me in Arabic when he heard where I was from. And he said, I'm sorry about what your people are going through. Do you know how much that meant for me from like a guy who's not working on this issue, who's not, I mean, I don't know what his history is in terms of the region, whether he's got any links, but you know, he's this guy who's a specialist on Birmingham
and
and
you're not Muslim, but still, but so he was like,
yeah.
that's so sweet though. He's so sweet.
Yeah. So, you know, just having like that little bit of like compassion, empathy, you know, just means so much. It means so much. At the same time, though, because I have to host a lot of podcasts on the issue of Palestine for the Britain Palestine Project. And I have got emotional on those in the last couple of years. And I kind of think like, and I constantly toy with this idea of like being professional and how much emotion to show. I'm sorry, but if you want me as a Palestinian to speak about everything that's going on without getting emotional, I can't do that anymore. Do you know what I mean? I won't be militant. I won't be fucking yelling and shouting and screaming. If you expect me to not be feeling anything at the moment, I'm sorry, I'm human. So get AI to fucking host your podcast if you want one without any fucking, I can't do it. You know, I can't be the one. So I can't host a podcast about child mental health in Gaza. We had to do that one. I still have nightmares about it for children in Gaza and the mental health professionals working with them. So yeah, I just really wanted to use this one case of Rachel Corrie to help frame the entire context, which is a lot. So I know I gave you so much, and I'm really sorry because I wanted to cover a bit of the history that led to the Rachel Corrie case, and then how we got from there to where we are now, because I know there's so many questions about what's going on now. And people have got to the point where they are saying, look, I don't know the full situation, but I know this is wrong. And I know our leaders need to be doing more to stop this happening. But I wanted to give people a bit more of the information to help them feel confident to talk about it, and to give them the facts and the figures and the resources. So remember the show notes, I will put all of the resources in so they can have access to the reports and so forth. So if someone says, oh, but can you call it a genocide? Yeah, you fucking can, because everyone's calling it a genocide. People with authority, organizations with authority are calling it a genocide. It's a fucking genocide now. Sorry. You know? Yeah, all of those things. And I wanted to honor Rachel Corrie and all the other international people that have sacrificed so much. So not just the ones that have lost their lives, but there's so many that have been wounded. And then there's so many that have just dedicated their lives professionally.
There's so many still there doing stuff.
So many over there, you know, that is disruptive for them. And they could have a cushy little life forgetting about fucking Palestine that has nothing to do with them. And they don't. And
once you start, it's like St. John. Once you join St. John, it's with you for life in some way. And once you start getting involved in the issue, you're never going to walk away.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but as an international, once you go over there and you see it with your own eyes, it's hard to forget and to just ignore it and go back home and leave it behind. This is the impression I get from, you know, international colleagues and the delegations I've brought over or been involved with. Like, once people see, you can't forget it, you know?
No.
And like that quote from, it was the Rachel Corrie quote, one of her quotes, where she was saying, you know, the people of Palestine will be fighting for this cause because it's their lives, but we need the support of the internationals because, like I said, people don't listen to us unless someone else white says the same thing, or organizations and institutions and politicians say the same thing, or a mass amount of civilian people say the same thing. This is why we need you guys, you know? So yeah, just wanted to thank all our listeners, because regularly I get messages of support on this issue from our listeners, because obviously almost every episode recently we've been mentioning Palestine, because I think I've said, like, if you think I talk about it a lot, it's only a small fraction of the amount that I'm thinking about it. And I'm here in London suburbs, you know, it's hard to get away from it. It's constantly on our minds. We're thinking about it, struggling to eat, sleep, fucking focus. I struggle to have a good time, because if I manage to, it's hard. And if I do, I have survivor's guilt. And that's just me outside of the war zone. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know. I wanted to say that if any of our listeners have any questions on the issue, please get in touch. If there's anything that someone's confronted you with that you didn't know how to respond to, or if there's any queries or concerns or whatever, then reach out. I'll either try to answer it or put you in touch with someone who can answer it, or give you a resource to
What's the
answer it.
best resource to find initial information, general information? Would you say like the Britain
Palestine Project? I'm saying this not because I am hosting their podcast, but just because I'm very familiar with the content of that podcast for that reason. The idea is there's a podcast that comes out every month. We try to do 2 a month. And if you have a look on their website, in the events, a podcast and events tab, I think it is, you can see all of our past episodes. And the idea with that podcast is to try to inform people about what's going on, but also to cover it from loads of different angles. So we've had artists, filmmakers, historians, lawyers, politicians, all kinds of experts in the field, but coming from it from a different angle. So whatever your interest might be, like we had the head of the Farmers Union talking about agriculture under the occupation, and trying to just cover it from all different angles so that we can appeal to whatever your interest, whatever your background, whatever your specialization is, coming at it from a different angle. So we've just covered an awful lot on the issue. In terms of news sources, I'm mainly Al Jazeera these days, with a little bit of Haaretz, which is the Israeli newspaper, because that's where I find actually what's going on.
I think this is the thing, and I'm sorry to criticize Daily Mail readers. I'm just using it as a generalization.
I don't think we have any here, but
I know people that will pick it up, read it, and then, and they think that's the news. And it's headlines. Like, I think I said before,
clickbait.
I went to clickbait. I went to bloody Scotland, the crime fiction festival, and it was absolutely great. And I went on watched panels rather, with journalists who've written books, and we asked them, or they were asked, where did they get their news from? And they all said they don't trust the news, even though they're journalists. They seek the news themselves. They look for news, and they will go to a wide range of sources. So they'll go to like an Israeli newspaper. They'll go to like a Palestinian one. They will look at a whole range of things, but they go out and they source the news rather than it coming to them. And the headlines, they tend to try and ignore the headlines and actually look for what's fact. And I think it's sad that people might not have a lot of time these days and they go, oh, I just look at the headlines to see what's happening. Well, that's not going to give you any information.
And then just generally as a rule of thumb for social media, if you read something on there and you find it shocking and you want to repost it, or it sticks in your mind, or it offends you or whatever, I recommend just Googling and trying to find like a reputable source to confirm or deny. Just fact check it, because it's social media. You can't guarantee. Yeah. But sadly, a lot of the horrific things that we're seeing on social media at the moment are true. So yeah, I just wanted to explain a bit this very complex issue that is in the media a lot right now, because I know there's a lot of questions and a lot of interest in it now to learn more about why we are in this situation. And I mainly wanted to honor the people that are struggling, suffering, dying as a result of this issue, whether they're international, whether they're Palestinian, and just like a little appeal to keep on like being there for us, supporting us.
I'll always be there.
I know. But, even if we had peace tomorrow, it's still going to be a long fucking road, So it's really, really hard to stay motivated. And honestly, like I said, seeing the public support is what keeps a lot of us going here, there, working on the issue, whether we're Palestinian or not. It does keep us going. Sometimes we worry when we organize events or when we have marches or whatever that we're preaching to the converted. But actually, that's important sometimes, to have these solidarity events where we are together with people that are supporting, because we have a lot of times where we're in rooms with people that are not very supportive.
Oh, so, yes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So it's just wanted to say thank you. So that's...
No, sorry, I cried
so much.
That's okay. It's, you are an amazing, I was going to say storyteller. It's not as if that sounds like it's not factual, but you're amazing at getting a really complex issue across in a really digestible
Thanks.
manner that I think people will understand.
I tried to simplify it as much as possible and get the core things. And obviously, like I said, sources in the show notes if you want to do deeper dives on any one of those very chunky bits of information. So Rachel Corrie, absolute legend. Like I said, we were robbed of having Rachel Corrie in the world with us for longer because she would have done amazing things.
She could have been president.
She would have done amazing things. I have no doubt that she would have made a difference. Right. So I think we need an Ink-Quisition.
Oh, I think we need a palate cleanser, big, right? And it better be a bloody good one.
It is a bloody good one because
it better be.
We went to CrimeCon.
CrimeCon was great. I really enjoyed this CrimeCon. Yes.
Everyone come to CrimeCon Birmingham, April 26th, I think. We'll be
there
one
day again.
It's a one-day event.
Manchester was one day.
It's in Birmingham. It'll be amazing. The northern ones, the non-London ones are quite good intro ones if you've not been before, because the London one is a really big event. It's a 2-day, like 5-stream thing. So there's like 4 or 5 talks going on at any one time over 2 days, a lot more people. So if you've never been, it could be potentially a bit overwhelming. So try one of the other events, the Birmingham one, for example, as a little baby intro step, and we will be there and very noticeable. So you'll be able to see us from afar. But we met a lot of our fellow true crime podcast hosts, which is always really nice. Again, nice little solidarity moment. But we got to hang out with the lovely Ross from Crime Viking. Amazing podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
And I asked if I could take a picture of his tattoo to submit to the Ink-Quisition. But
his tattoos were phenomenal. I could not believe how good they were.
Yeah, he's got amazing tattoos, but also you reacted so strongly, so positively to this tattoo. So I learned something about you. So I'm sharing it now. Look at this cutie patootie. But he has this tattoo. The one he's submitting is this one on the bottom part of his arm.
It's Jason and the Argonauts.
But you saw it and went, oh my God, it's Jason and the Argonauts. And I was like, I've got a closer uppy one. I was like, how did you know that? And you were like, I love Jason and the Argonauts, which was something I did not know about you. So
it's because it was a movie I watched. And obviously he's watched the same movie. And that's why, and all the bits that I liked that were my favorite bits were his favorite bits. And he obviously had the tattoo. But it's the tattoo, it's the skeleton army from like Jason and the Argonauts. And one of the key scenes is where they throw teeth on the ground. And these teeth, is it stop motion animation or something? And they throw the teeth in the ground. And then these teeth are almost like seeds. And these skeletons grow from the teeth. And that's the kind of the scene. And then they become the fighters.
I've seen the film, but a long time ago, I didn't remember any of it, but it clearly stuck with you. So it was just so cute seeing how excited you were about this tattoo.
I was so excited about Jason and the Argonauts tattoo.
I know. So Ross, thank you so much. If you guys haven't already, then do check out Crime Viking.
Absolutely do. And check out the tattoos. And like, who did these tattoos? We need to find out because they are superb.
Also, he told me a cute story. He said he walked in on his daughter. He's got 2 daughters, and she was using a Switchblade Sisters Social Club pen to do some drawing. And I was like, oh, because we'd given out pens, I think, at one of the crime cons.
Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, I gave her a notebook so that she could use her pen in our notebook, in our Switchblade Sisters Social Club notebook.
I love this how it's like, we're at CrimeCon and Dee's like, should we sell some notebooks? I was like, yeah, sure. And then we're just like, no, I'm just going to give them away because we love everyone. Have one.
Yeah. That might not happen in Birmingham, though.
We're like, we can't charge you because we love you so much. Here you go.
We'll be bankrupt by Birmingham. So, all right. So that was the Ink-Quisition. And that was our podcast episode. Sorry, it's a bit of a longer one, but I just wanted to say I love you and I love our sexy listeners.
I am going to say that I love you And I am keen to learn more about our sexy listeners.
You love the ones that you've met so far.
I like them very much.
All right, I'm going to go and eat cheese and beans.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. I'm going to go and have some fish and chips.
Nice. All right. Well, see you all next week. Love you.
I love you.
Bye.
Like this episode? Want more? Come visit me, Isla, at Crimley Good Books in the heart of York. We're an independent bookshop dedicated entirely to crime. From cosy mysteries to gritty thrillers, historical whodunits to juicy true crime. We've got signed editions, special gifts, and plenty of recommendations for your next obsession. We also host a bunch of awesome author events. Can't make it in person? Visit us online at crimleygoodbooks.co.uk.